It was a Tuesday evening in Los Angeles, a time when the city usually buzzes with the energy of late-night traffic and neon lights. But tonight, the sky had opened up. A rare, heavy rain was pouring down over the hills, turning the usually dry pavement into a mirror of reflections. For most people in the City of Angels, the rain was a nuisance. It ruined designer shoes and made the expensive sports cars skid on the freeways. But for one man, riding through the winding canyons above the city, the rain was exactly what he needed. Keanu Reeves was leaning into a curve on his motorcycle, the cold water hitting his face like tiny needles. He wasn't wearing a helmet that covered his face, just a simple one that left his features exposed to the elements. He loved this. Out here on the bike, he wasn't a movie star. He wasn't the guy everyone knew from the big screen. He was just a man on a machine, focusing on the road, the throttle, and the moment. There were no cameras, no scripts to memorize, and no crowds shouting his name. It was just the sound of the engine and the smell of wet asphalt. This was his church. This was where he went to clear his mind after months of filming and traveling. As he descended from the hills and into the more flat, residential streets of the city, the lights of the condos began to appear. He was heading home. It wasn't a sprawling mansion in the hills where you need a map to find the front door. It was a high-end condo building, secure and private, which was exactly what he valued the most. He liked that he could come and go without the whole world knowing his business, or at least, he usually could. He pulled into the underground parking garage of his building, the roar of his engine echoing off the concrete walls. The garage was brightly lit and smelled faintly of car exhaust and cleaning products. He eased his bike into his designated parking spot, right next to a sleek, black luxury car that looked like it had never seen a drop of rain in its life. Keanu killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the stillness wash over him. He shook his head, water flying from his hair like a wet dog. He swung his leg off the bike and stood up, stretching his back. He felt the ache in his muscles, a reminder that he wasn't as young as he used to be, even though he still moved like he was. He wasn't dressed like a celebrity who had millions of dollars in the bank. He was wearing his usual outfit, a worn-out black leather jacket that had seen better days, simple gray t-shirt underneath, and dark jeans that were frayed at the cuffs. On his feet were a pair of heavy, muddy boots. He looked more like a construction worker finishing a long shift than one of the most famous actors on the planet. He reached into the storage compartment of his bike and pulled out a small backpack. It was old and battered, the zippers barely holding on. He slung it over one shoulder, balancing the weight. He wasn't carrying expensive luggage or anything flashy, just his essentials. He took a deep breath, wiped the rain from his eyes with the back of his hand, and started walking toward the elevators that would take him up to the main lobby. The walk through the garage felt longer than usual. His boots made a heavy clunking sound on the concrete asterisk thud, thud, thud. Asterisk, it was a rhythm that usually comforted him. But tonight he was just tired. He wanted to get upstairs, take a hot shower, and maybe make some tea. He didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't want to sign autographs. He just wanted to disappear into the safety of his own home as he approached the elevator bank. He passed a few other residents who were getting out of their cars. They were dressed in fine suits and evening wear, probably coming back from a dinner party or a show. They barely looked at him. Why would they? To them, he was just a guy on a motorcycle, a little wet, a little messy, blending into the background. He kept his head down, pulling the collar of his jacket up higher, trying to hide his face. He didn't make eye contact. He just wanted to be invisible. He pressed the button for the elevator, and the doors slid open with a soft ding. He stepped inside, turning around to face the closing doors. He watched the lines of cars and concrete pillars disappear as the doors shut, enclosing him in the quiet box. He watched the numbers light up above the door as he ascended, counting them off in his head. 3, 4, 5. He was getting closer to the quiet he craved. When the doors opened on the lobby level, the atmosphere changed completely. Unlike the raw industrial feel of the garage, the lobby was pristine. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive flowers. The floor was polished marble that reflected the light of a giant crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. It was the kind of lobby that screamed money and success. It's cold and beautiful all at the same time. Keanu stepped out of the elevator, his wet boots leaving faint, dirty footprints on the pristine floor. He winced a little, seeing the marks, knowing the cleaning staff would have to scrub them later. He made a mental note to apologize to them next time he saw them. That was just who he was. He didn't think he was too important to clean up his own mess. Across the large, open space, he could see the glass front doors. The security desk was positioned strategically in the center, giving the guard a clear view of anyone coming in or going out. Behind the desk sat a young man, looking sharp in his uniform. He was new. Keanu didn't recognize him. The usual guards, older men who had been there for years, knew him by sight and usually just gave him a nod. But this guy was young, strict, and looking very serious about his job. Keanu didn't think much of it. He assumed he would just walk across the lobby, wave a hand, and be out the door or up to his private elevator if he was going that way. But he had to cross the lobby first to get to the resident entrance. He adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of it pull on his shoulder, and began to walk across the marble floor. He kept his gaze low, watching his feet move. The rain had soaked through his jeans, making them cling to his legs uncomfortably. He felt cold water dripping down the back of his neck. All he could think about was the warmth of his apartment. He wasn't paying attention to the way the young guard's eyes locked onto him the moment he stepped out of the elevator. The guard saw a soaking wet figure in old clothes, looking like he had just wandered in off the street. To the guard, this didn't look like a resident. This looked like trouble. Keanu was about halfway across the lobby, lost in his own thoughts when he sensed movement. He looked up, expecting to see a neighbor walking by. Instead, he saw the security guard stepping out from behind the desk, moving directly into his path. The guard had a clipboard in one hand and a look of stern determination on his face. Keanu slowed his pace, his eyebrows furrowing slightly in confusion. He stopped a few feet away from the guard, waiting for him to move aside, but the guard didn't move. He stood his ground, blocking the way to the elevators and the main exit. He looked Keanu up and down, taking in the wet hair, the dirty boots, and the old jacket. There was no recognition in his eyes. There was no, "Oh wow, it's Keanu Reeves." There was only suspicion. Keanu shifted his weight, feeling a little awkward. He wasn't used to being treated like an intruder in his own home, but he knew better than to get angry. He knew that sometimes just doing a simple thing like walking home could turn into a misunderstanding. If you didn't look the part people expected you to look, he took a deep breath, preparing to explain who he was, unaware that this simple misunderstanding was about to turn into a standoff that would surprise everyone involved. He stood there, water dripping from his jacket onto the expensive floor, looking at the young man who refused to let him pass, wondering how something so simple could become so complicated.
The air in the lobby felt heavy, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning system. Keanu stood still, looking at the young man who had stepped directly into his path. The security guard was tall and broad-shouldered, filling out his dark blue uniform neatly. He looked clean, dry, and very official, holding a clipboard against his chest like a shield. His face was serious, his jaw set tight, and his eyes were scanning Keanu with a look that made it clear he saw a problem. Not a person. Keanu blinked a few times, the rain still dripping from the ends of his hair onto his shoulders. He paused, waiting for the guard to recognize him, to offer an apologetic smile, or to step aside. But none of that happened. The guard just stood there, blocking the way to the elevators that led to the private residences. The silence stretched on, growing uncomfortable by the second. It was a strange feeling for Keanu. He was so used to people knowing exactly who he was the moment they looked at his face, that this complete lack of recognition was almost baffling. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly. His voice was rough and tired. He nodded his head slightly, a polite gesture to move past. "Just heading up to my place." The guard didn't budge an inch. Instead, he took a small step forward, invading Keanu's personal space just enough to make a point. He looked Keanu up and down one more time, his eyes lingering on the wet, mud-spattered boots and the worn-out leather jacket. The contrast between the two of them was stark. Here was a guard making sure the building stayed pristine and safe for the wealthy. And here was a man who looked like he had been sleeping outside. "Sir, this is a private residential building," the guard said. His voice was loud, echoing slightly off the marble walls. It was the kind of voice used to command authority, practiced in a mirror maybe. "Residents and authorized guests only. I need to know what your business is here." Keanu stopped trying to walk around him. He realized this wasn't a joke. The guard genuinely didn't know who he was. He looked at the young man's name tag, but the print was too small to read from this distance. Keanu let out a small, tired sigh. He didn't want to cause a scene. He didn't want to be the guy who pulls the "do you know who I am" card. That was the worst thing a person could do. It was rude, and Keanu prided himself on being polite to everyone, especially people just doing their jobs. "I know," Keanu replied, keeping his voice calm and gentle. He tried to offer a reassuring smile, though he felt cold and shivering. "I'm a resident." "Unit 8B? I'm just coming in from a ride?" The guard looked at him skeptically. He glanced down at his clipboard, flipping through a few pages as if checking for something. "8B?" he repeated, his tone dripping with doubt. "We have strict protocols. I haven't seen you come in before. Are you sure you have the right building?" Keanu shifted the weight of his backpack, feeling the wet fabric of his jeans sticking to his legs. "I'm sure. I've lived here for a while. I think I might have my key card in here somewhere." He reached down to unzip the front pocket of his bag, his fingers fumbling slightly with the cold. "Hold on!" the guard snapped, holding up a hand. "Don't reach into the bag yet." Keanu froze, his hand hovering over the zipper. He looked up, surprised by the sharpness in the guard's voice. The situation was shifting from a simple misunderstanding to something tense. The guard's hand rested near his hip, close to a radio or maybe a flashlight, treating Keanu like a potential threat. "Protocol?" the guard explained stiffly. "I need to see some identification first. Photo ID. If you're a resident, you should have an ID card or a driver's license that matches the address." Keane withdrew his hand slowly. "Right, ID, okay." He patted his jacket pockets empty, he patted his jeans empty, then he remembered. He had taken his wallet out before the ride because he didn't like the bulk of it in his back pocket while leaning forward on the motorcycle. He had stuffed it into the main compartment of his backpack to keep it safe. It was in there, buried under a rain poncho and a pair of gloves. "It's in my backpack," Keanu said, gesturing to the bag on his shoulder. "It's just deep inside. Let me just grab it for you." The guard shook his head firmly. "I can't let you dig around in there until I verify your intent to enter. You understand how this looks, right?" He gestured to Keanu's wet clothes. "You walking off the street soaking wet, no uniform, no delivery badge, looking like you do. I can't just let you walk up to the apartments because you say you live in 8B. Keanu felt a prickle of frustration, but he pushed it down. He understood the logic, even if it was annoying. He supposed he should be glad the guard was doing his job well enough to stop strangers. If he wasn't famous, he would probably appreciate the security. But right now, he was just a tired man standing in his own lobby being treated like a trespasser. "Look," Keanu said, trying to keep his voice level. "I really do live here. My name is Keanu. If you check the list, maybe you can find me?" The guard looked at his clipboard again, but he didn't really read it. He seemed more interested in staring Keanu down. "I know the names of the people in 8B. It's not on my emergency list. And I don't see a Keanu on the move-in logs for today." "That's because I didn't move in today," Keanu said. A small laugh escaped him, but the guard didn't laugh back. "I've been here for years. Just ask the manager or the other guards." "The other guards aren't here right now," the guard said, his voice hardening. "I'm in charge of this post. And I'm telling you, you can't go up without ID." Keanu looked around the lobby. It was completely empty except for them. The rain was beating against the glass doors, a rhythmic drumming sound that seemed to mock the silence inside. He felt trapped. He didn't want to unzip his bag and dump everything out on the clean floor just to prove a point, but it seemed like that was the only option. "Is there a problem here?" The guard asked, his chest puffing out slightly. He seemed to be enjoying the power dynamic, liking that he could control the situation. Keanu looked him in the eye. There was no anger in his gaze, just a deep exhaustion. "No problem," he said. "I just want to go home. Can I please just get my wallet?" "It's literally right there." The guard hesitated. He looked at the elevator banks, then back at Keanu. He was thinking about what his supervisor would say if he let a guy who looked like a homeless person wander the halls. He was thinking about the zero-tolerance policy for trespassers. The risk of being wrong was too high. "Step outside," the guard ordered, pointing toward the glass doors. "You can get your ID out there, and then you can come back and ring the bell like a visitor. I can't let you stay in the lobby if you aren't verified." Keanu couldn't believe what he was hearing. Step outside? Into the pouring rain? Because he didn't have his ID in his hand? It was ridiculous. He stood his ground. He wasn't going to step outside into the cold just to fetch his own wallet to prove he lived in his own home. "I'm not going outside," Keanu said firmly. His voice dropped an octave lower than before. "I'm going to stand right here, and I'm going to get my ID." He reached for the zipper of his backpack again. This time his movement was deliberate. "Stop!" the guard barked. He stepped forward aggressively, reaching out to grab Keanu's arm. "I told you not to reach into the bag." Keanu pulled his arm back quickly, startled by the physical contact. The guard's hand grazed his wet jacket sleeve. The tension in the room skyrocketed instantly. Keanu took a step back, putting distance between them. His heart rate picked up, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. He hadn't been grabbed by a stranger like that since, well, he couldn't remember when. "Don't touch me," Keanu said. He didn't shout, but the calm was gone from his voice. It was replaced by a cold, hard warning. "Then follow instructions." The guard shouted back. He was red in the face now, flustered that this scruffy-looking guy wasn't backing down. "You are trespassing on private property. I have the right to detain you until the police arrive if you don't leave." Keanu stared at him. The words hung in the air like smoke. Detain him, police, all because he came home without his wallet in his hand. It was absurd. It was a comedy sketch, except it wasn't funny. He looked at the guard's young face, seeing the fear and aggression mixed together. The guard was way out of his depth, and he didn't even know it. "You want to call the police?" Keanu asked, his voice quiet but dangerous. "You want to call the police on a resident for coming home? Do you know how much trouble you're going to be in when they get here and you've held me up for nothing?" "I'm not in trouble," the guard stammered, though he looked unsure now. He looked at his radio, then back at Keanu. "You're the one acting suspicious, resisting security. Just get out." The two men stood facing each other in the middle of the luxurious lobby. The expensive chandelier sparkled above them, indifferent to the conflict below. Keanu was shivering visibly now, the cold finally seeping into his bones, but he stood his ground. He wasn't going to move. He knew he was in the right, and he knew that eventually the truth would come out. But for now, it was just his word against this young guard's stubbornness. The guard had made up his mind. In his eyes, Keanu wasn't a neighbor. He was a problem. And he wasn't going to let Keanu pass until he won. Keanu slowly reached for the zipper again, moving very slowly so the guard wouldn't panic. He didn't care what the guard said. He wasn't stepping outside. He was going to get his ID, show it to him, and then have...
The silence that filled the lobby after the guard shouted was heavy and thick. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving just the sound of the rain drumming relentlessly against the glass doors outside. Tap, tap, tap. It was a mocking rhythm, a stark contrast to the frozen stillness of the two men standing in the center of the marble floor. Keanu didn't move. He stood his ground, his boots planted firmly, though he was shivering slightly from the cold water that was soaking through his clothes. His face was calm, almost too calm. He had spent decades dealing with high-pressure situations on movie sets, stunts, tight deadlines. But this was different. This wasn't a script he could memorize, and there was no director to yell cut when things got too intense. This was real life, and the aggression coming from the young guard was unsettling. He looked at the young man.
Really looked at him.
He saw the fear in the guard's eyes, mixed with the stubborn need to be right. The guard's chest was heaving, his knuckles white as he gripped the clipboard. He was terrified of making a mistake, of letting a stranger slip past and losing his job. Keanu understood that fear. Everyone wants to do a good job, but there was a difference between being careful and being foolish. "I am not leaving," Keanu said again. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight of authority that came from years of commanding a set. Even if he didn't like using it. "And I am not going to reach into my bag until you stop threatening to arrest me. You need to take a breath and think about this." The guard's face turned a darker shade of red. He didn't like being told what to do, especially not by someone he considered a trespasser. In his mind, the narrative was set. A scruffy guy tries to sneak into a rich building, gets caught, and now he's arguing. The guard felt like the hero of his own movie, standing up to a rule breaker. "I don't need to think about it," the guard snapped. "I know the rules. No ID, no entry. You are currently refusing a lawful order to leave private property. That makes you a trespasser." Took a step closer, trying to use his size to intimidate Keanu. Keanu didn't flinch. He just watched him with those sad, dark eyes that the whole world recognized, but which this guard found completely unreadable. "If you call the police," Keanu said, his tone dropping low, "they are going to come here. They are going to ask me for my ID. I am going to give it to them. And then they are going to ask you why you are harassing a resident who pays to live here. Is that really how you want your shift to end? With a report filed against you for dragging a homeowner out into the rain?" The guard hesitated for a fraction of a second. The logic hung in the air, but his pride was too strong. He couldn't back down now. To back down would be to admit he was wrong, and he wasn't ready to do that. "I'm not harassing you," the guard argued, his voice rising again. "I'm protecting the residents. We have families living here. Important people. We can't just let anyone walk in off the street." As if on cue, the heavy glass doors of the lobby swooshed open. A gust of wet, cold air rushed in, followed by a woman carrying 2 bags of groceries. She was dressed in expensive workout gear, wearing headphones and looking down at her phone. She walked in, shaking off her umbrella, completely oblivious to the standoff happening just a few feet away. She glanced up, saw the 2 men standing close to each other, and immediately sensed the tension. Her eyes widened. She looked from the angry, red-faced guard in the uniform to the soaking wet man in the leather jacket standing opposite him. She paused. She looked at Keanu. She squinted, tilting her head. She knew that face. Everyone knew that face. But her brain couldn't place it immediately outside of a movie screen. Why was John Wick standing in her lobby looking like a drowned rat? And why was security yelling at him? "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice wavering a little. She tightened her grip on her grocery bags, ready to turn back around if there was danger. The guard turned his head slightly, breaking eye contact with Keanu. "Ma'am, please go to the elevators quickly. We are handling a security issue. This individual is not authorized to be here." The woman looked at Keanu again. Keanu looked at her and gave a small, tired smile. "Hi," he said softly. "Sorry about the noise. Just a small disagreement." The woman's jaw dropped. She knew the voice. The soft, polite rumble. She looked at the guard, then back at Keanu, her brain finally connecting the dots. She didn't say anything, though. She was too shocked. She just hurried past them, pressing the elevator button repeatedly, as if to make the elevator move faster. She kept glancing back over her shoulder, her phone poised in her hand, probably ready to record whatever happened next. Keanu watched her go. He knew she recognized him. He hoped she wouldn't post about it online. The last thing he wanted was a video titled, "Keanu Reeves kicked out of his own building," trending on social media before he even got upstairs. "You see," the guard said, turning his attention back to Keanu, feeling a boost of confidence because a resident had walked by safely. "You're disturbing the peace. This is your last warning. Step outside, or I'm dialing the police." He reached for the phone on his belt. It was a thick, black radio with a direct line to emergency services. His thumb hovered over the button. Keanu let out a long, frustrated sigh. He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back from his forehead. He looked at the ceiling, shaking his head. This was absurd. It was like a bad comedy. He thought about just grabbing his ID and forcing the issue. But he worried that if he moved too fast, the guard might tackle him. The guy was jittery, amped up on adrenaline and authority. A physical struggle was the last thing Keanu wanted. He hated violence. He hated confrontation. He just wanted to take off his wet boots. Look, Keanu tried one last time, his voice pleading now. My name is Keanu. Check the roster. Look at the website for the building. I'm on the board of the Condo Association. I help pay your salary. Please, just look at your computer. I don't need to look at the computer, the guard said, his voice trembling slightly. I know who belongs here and who doesn't. People like you don't live in a building like this. Said it with such finality. The words hung in the air, ugly and dismissive. People like you. It said everything. It was about the clothes. It was about the bike. It was about the assumption that wealth looked a certain way, that a guy in a dirty jacket couldn't possibly own a penthouse. Keanu stopped smiling. The polite mask fell away. He stood up straighter, his shoulders squaring back. The nice guy vibe evaporated, replaced by the intense energy of a man who had survived a lot in his life and wasn't going to be bullied by a security guard in his own lobby. People like me? Keanu repeated quietly. You heard me, the guard said, though he took a small step back. The sudden change in Keanu's demeanor was intimidating. The guard realized he might have pushed too far, but he was in too deep now. He pressed the button on his radio. A burst of static filled the room, followed by a beep. Dispatch, this is Post 4. I have a code 4 at the main lobby. Trespasser refusing to leave. Requesting immediate police backup and a supervisor. The voice on the other end crackled back. Copy that Post 4, police are en route. 8 to 5 minutes. Keanu shook his head slowly. 5 minutes, he muttered. Great. He stood there, feeling the water dripping down his spine, making him shiver again. He thought about the police cars pulling up outside. He thought about the flashing lights reflecting off the wet pavement. He thought about the neighbors looking out their windows. It was going to be a scene. It was exactly the kind of chaos he spent his whole life trying to avoid. But he wasn't going to stand out in the rain. He crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive posture, and leaned back against one of the marble pillars near the elevator bank. He looked at the guard, who was now shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking nervous. The reality of what he had just done was sinking in. He had called the cops on a resident. If he was wrong, and this guy actually did live there, he was going to be fired instantly. Keanu watched the realization dawn on the guard's face. He saw the young man's eyes flicker toward the front door, then to the computer screen on the desk, then back to Keanu. The doubt was there. The guard was thinking, asterisk, what if? Asterisk, but the guard didn't say anything. He just stood there, gripping his radio, waiting for the sirens while Keanu leaned against the pillar, closing his eyes for a moment, trying to find a small piece of patience amidst the ridiculousness of it all. The lobby was cold, the guard was angry, and the clock was ticking down until this misunderstanding became a public spectacle. Keanu just hoped that when the police arrived, they would have a sense of humor. He hoped the building manager would arrive before the handcuffs came out, because he wasn't moving. Not an inch. This was his home, and he wasn't going to be chased out of it by a guy with a clipboard and a bad attitude. The ticking of the large antique clock on the lobby wall seemed to get louder with every passing second. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It was a heavy wooden sound that echoed through the vast, empty space, marking the time until the police arrived. 5 minutes had never felt so long. Keanu leaned back against the hard marble pillar, his arms still crossed tightly over his chest, to preserve whatever body heat he had left. The water from his jacket had soaked through to his shirt, and a cold shiver ran through him that he couldn't control. He watched the security guard. The young man was pacing now, walking back and forth in a small circle near the desk. He kept looking at the front doors, then at his radio, then at Keanu, and then back at the doors. The confidence he had earlier was starting to crack. The silence was allowing doubt to creep in. The guard's breathing was shallow and fast. He was replaying the last 10 minutes in his head. Why was this guy so calm? If he was a trespasser, a criminal, or a crazy person, he would have tried to run by now. Or he would have gotten angry. Or he would have pulled a weapon. But this man was just standing there, waiting. He wasn't sweating from nervousness. He was sweating because he was wet. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was just tired. The guard chewed his lip, a nervous habit. He looked at the wet footprints on the floor again. They looked like the footprints of someone who had just walked a long way in the rain. "Look," the guard said suddenly, stopping his pacing. His voice wasn't as loud as before. It sounded a little shaky. "If you just leave now, before they get here, I won't say you ran away. I'll just say you walked off. You won't get in trouble with the police." Keanu looked at him, his expression softening slightly. He saw the offer for what it was, a way out. The guard was realizing that something might be wrong with his picture. He was trying to fix it before it exploded. Keanu shook his head slowly. "I'm not leaving," he said gently. "I live here. If I leave now, I'm letting you chase me out of my own house. I can't do that." The guard let out a frustrated groan and ran a hand through his hair. "Why are you making this so difficult? Just show me the ID." "I told you," Keanu said, his patience wearing thin but not breaking. "I don't want to dig through a wet bag and dump my stuff on this nice floor. I'm waiting for your supervisor." The guard opened his mouth to argue again, to shout about protocol and rules. But the sound of an elevator bell cut him off. It wasn't the sharp ding of the main elevator bank. It was the softer, deeper chime of the service elevator located around the corner, near the management offices. Both men turned their heads. A moment later, a heavy wooden door that led to the back offices swung open. A woman stepped out into the lobby. She was older, probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was wearing a tailored blazer and holding a stack of files. This was the building manager, a woman who had run the building for over 20 years. She knew everything that happened in the condos, from leaking pipes to noisy pets, and she knew every resident by face, if not by name. She stopped abruptly when she saw the scene in the middle of the lobby. She saw the young guard standing tense and red-faced, and she saw the wet, scruffy man leaning against the pillar. She frowned. She didn't like conflict in her lobby. It upset the residents. "What is going on here?" she asked. Her voice was sharp and carried authority. She didn't yell, but she didn't need to. She walked toward them, her heels clicking on the marble. The guard straightened up instantly, trying to look professional. "Ma'am," he said, standing at attention, "we have a situation here. This individual entered the building without ID and refuses to leave. I have called the police. They are en route." The building manager walked up to them, ignoring the guard for a moment. She looked at the man standing by the pillar. She took in the wet leather jacket, the unruly hair, the heavy boots. Then she looked at his face. She stopped walking. Her eyes went wide. She didn't say a word for a long moment. The air in the room seemed to stop moving. The guard watched her, confused by her reaction. He expected her to be pleased that he was being so vigilant, that he was protecting the building from a potential intruder. Keanu pushed himself off the pillar and stood up straight. He didn't look angry. He looked at the manager and offered a small, weary smile. "Hi," he said. "Sorry about the mess. It's raining pretty hard out there." The manager's face softened instantly. She rushed forward, passing the guard, as if he were invisible. "Oh, Keanu," she said, her voice filled with genuine concern. She reached out and touched his arm gently. "Look at you, you're soaking wet. Are you okay? Why are you standing in the lobby?" The guard stood frozen. His mouth fell open slightly. He looked from the manager to the wet man. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to process what he was seeing. The manager was hugging the intruder. She knew his name, Keanu. The guard whispered. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. It felt like a word he had heard before but never said out loud. The manager pulled back and looked at the guard, and her expression changed from concern to icy fury. She turned on him, her hands on her hips. officer, she said, using his title, even though she was clearly angry. Did you just say you called the police on Mr. Reeves? Mr. Reeves, the guard stammered. He looked at Keanu again, really looked at him. The wet hair plastered to the forehead, the intense eyes, the jawline. The image from the movie poster he had seen in the subway station last week flashed in his mind. Asterisk, The Matrix. John Wick. Asterisk, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a freight train. The blood drained from the guard's face. He turned pale, almost as white as the marble floor. Beal, the guard choked out. He couldn't finish the sentence. His knees felt weak. He had just threatened to arrest a movie legend. He had just treated a man who probably owned half the building like a homeless person. He had grabbed his arm. Yes, Mr. Reeves, the manager said, her voice rising. He owns the penthouse. He has lived here for 6 years. And you are standing here telling me you called the police on him because he didn't have his ID in his hand. The guard took a step back, his eyes wide with terror. I didn't recognize him, he sputtered. He wasn't wearing. He looked. He was on a motorcycle. The wet clothes. Keanu stepped in between them. He could see the guard was on the verge of a panic attack. The young man looked like he was about to pass out or throw up. Keanu felt a wave of pity for him. It was a mistake. A stupid, honest mistake. The guard was just trying to do his job, even if he was doing it terribly. It's okay, Keanu said, putting a hand on the manager's arm to calm her down. He was just doing his job. He didn't know it is not okay. The manager snapped, though she lowered her voice. She looked at the guard. You need to cancel that police call right now. Do you have any idea what happens if the LAPD shows up and finds out you detained a resident for no reason? And not just any resident? The guard fumbled with his radio, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He pressed the button with a trembling thumb. Dispatch. This is post 4. Cancel. Cancel the backup. False alarm. Repeat, false alarm. Situation resolved. He looked up from the radio, his eyes filled with fear. He looked at Keanu, terrified that the actor was going to scream at him, or sue him, or demand he be fired on the spot. Most people with that much power would have humiliated him. Keanu sighed and reached into his backpack. Finally, he unzipped the main compartment. He didn't care about being careful anymore. He pulled out his leather wallet. It was wet, but the ID inside was safe. He opened it and held it out to the guard. Here, Keanu said. Just so you know for next time. The guard looked at the ID. It was a California driver's license. The photo was serious, but the name was clear. Keanu Reeves. The address matched the building. I'm so sorry, the guard whispered. He looked like he was about to cry. I'm so sorry. I thought you were. I didn't mean to. I'm new, and I didn't think. It's all right, Keanu said, taking his wallet back. He tucked it into his pocket. I get it. I don't look like the other guys who live here. I don't drive a Ferrari. I ride a motorcycle. I look messy. It happens. The manager shook her head, still furious, but she could see that Keanu wasn't going to make a scene. She let out a long breath and smoothed down her blazer. Go upstairs, Keanu, she said gently. Go get dry. I'll deal with this. Thanks, Keanu said. He adjusted his backpack and looked at the guard one last time. The young man was staring at his shoes, completely defeated. Keanu said softly. The guard looked up. You're sharp, Keanu said. You noticed me? You didn't just let me walk by? You were protecting the building. That's good. Just maybe ask the name before you call the cops next time. Okay? The guard nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sir. I mean, okay? Keanu gave him a small nod of respect. He didn't want the kid to quit. He didn't want him to live with this mistake forever. He wanted him to learn. Have a good night, Keanu said. He turned and walked toward the private elevator bank. This time, as he walked across the marble floor, his boots squeaking, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was a silence of shock and relief. He pressed the button for the penthouse. The doors opened immediately. He stepped inside, turned around, saw the manager standing there with her hands on her hips, lecturing the guard in a hushed but stern. The soft hum of the elevator motors was the only sound as the car rose smoothly through the shaft. Keanu leaned his head back against the cold metal wall, closing his eyes. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp in the lobby was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, aching weariness. He felt the cold water from his hair dripping down his neck, sliding under his collar and running down his spine. It was an unpleasant feeling, clammy and heavy. He watched the digital numbers above the door count up. With every floor, the distance between him and the confrontation grew. He was leaving behind the anger, the fear, and the embarrassment. But he wasn't leaving behind the memory of the young guard's face. That look of pure terror, when the realization hit him, that was the image burned into Keanu's mind right now. The elevator dinged softly. The door slid open to reveal the private hallway that led to just one door, his front door. He stepped out, his boots making a squelching sound on the plush carpet of the hallway. He loved this carpet. It was thick and soft, a welcome change from the hard marble downstairs. He walked to his door and typed in the code on the keypad. The lock clicked open. He pushed his way inside. The air inside his apartment was still and smelled faintly of old books and coffee. It was a comforting scent, the scent of home. Unlike the lobby downstairs, which was designed to impress people, his home was designed to live in. There were no chandeliers or pristine white floors. There were stacks of scripts, a comfortable worn-out couch, and a few guitars leaning against the wall. It was messy, but it was his mess. He dropped his backpack on the floor inside the entryway. It landed with a heavy thud. He didn't bother to hang up his wet jacket. He just stripped it off his shoulders and let it fall onto the coat rack. He kicked off his heavy, muddy boots, leaving them in a pile. He stood there in his socks, feeling the cold air of the apartment against his damp jeans. For a long moment, he just stood there in the dark. He didn't turn on the lights. He looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows that covered one wall of the living room. The city of Los Angeles was spread out below him, a grid of twinkling lights and moving cars. The rain was still falling, blurring the lights into strange, colorful streaks. It looked beautiful from up here. Peaceful. Down there, on the street level. It was chaotic and cold. He walked over to the window and pressed his hand against the glass. He felt the vibration of the city, but he couldn't hear it. He was sealed away in his quiet box in the sky. It was a strange life. Millions of people knew his face. They cheered for him in theaters. They wrote stories about him on the internet. But to a security guard just 10 floors down, he was just a nobody. A nuisance. Keanu let out a long breath. It fogged up the glass in front of him. He wasn't angry at the guard. He really wasn't. He knew he looked rough. He knew that if he saw himself walking down the street, he might do a double take too. It was just exhausting. It was tiring to always have to prove who you are. To always have to justify your existence in a space you paid for. He wondered if the guard would have treated a man in a tailored suit the same way. Probably not. And that was the sad part. The guard wasn't judging him on his character. He was judging him on his clothes. He turned away from the window and walked toward the bathroom. He needed a hot shower. He needed to wash the rain and the confrontation off his skin. He flipped the light switch in the bathroom, blinking in the sudden brightness. He caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. His hair was a wet mess, plastered to his forehead. His eyes were tired. He looked like the guy the guard saw, a tired, middle-aged man. He turned on the water, letting it run until steam began to fill the room. He stripped off the rest of his wet clothes and stepped under the spray. The hot water hit his skin like a blessing. He closed his eyes and let the water run over his face, washing away the grime and the stress. He stood there for a long time, just letting the heat soak into his bones as he stood there. His mind drifted back to the lobby. He thought about the young guard's fear. The kid wasn't a bad person. He was just scared of making a mistake. He was terrified of losing his job. In a way, Keanu understood that. The world is expensive, and jobs are hard to keep. The guard was just trying to survive. He was trying to be the hero of his own story, protecting the rich people from the scary outsider. The irony was painful. Keanu turned off the water and grabbed a towel. He dried off roughly, trying to warm up his skin. He pulled on a pair of sweatpants and a clean t-shirt. He felt human again. He felt like himself. He walked out into the kitchen and filled a glass with water. He drank it all in one go. He looked at his phone sitting on the counter. He hesitated. He should probably call the building manager. He should probably complain. That was what people with power did. They complained when they were inconvenienced. He could get the guard fired with a single phone call. He picked up the phone. He stared at the screen, but he didn't dial the manager. Instead, he just stood there, thinking, what good would firing the guy do? The kid would lose his income. He'd probably tell everyone that Keanu Reeves was a jerk who got him fired. That wasn't the truth. The truth was that the kid made a mistake. A big one, sure, but a mistake. Keanu put the phone down. He walked to the living room and sat down on his couch. It creaked under his weight, a familiar, comforting sound. He picked up his acoustic guitar from the stand. He didn't play anything specific. He just strummed a few chords, letting the sound fill the quiet room. The music was soft and melancholy. About 20 minutes later, the house phone rang. It was the landline, the line that very few people had. Keanu picked it up. Hello? Keanu, a woman's voice said. It was the building manager. She sounded breathless. I am so sorry about what happened downstairs. I have reprimanded the officer. I am writing up an incident report. I can assure you, he will be disciplined severely. Do you want us to terminate his employment? Because I will do it right now if you say the word. Keanu smiled slightly. He tapped his fingers on the body of the guitar. He looked out the window at the rain. No, he said. Please don't fire him. The manager was silent for a moment. Keanu, he humiliated you. He called the police on you. Why would you want him to stay? Because he was doing what he thought was right, Keanu said softly. He was protecting the building. He was protecting my neighbors. He was just overenthusiastic. And he was wrong. I think losing his job is too high a price for a wrong guess. You sure? The manager asked, her voice full of disbelief. Most residents would be furious. I'm not most residents, Keanu said. Just maybe tell him to ease up a little. Tell him to smile more. And tell him to learn what a motorcycle rider looks like. The manager let out a small laugh. It sounded relieved. Okay, I'll talk to him. But you are too nice for your own good, Keanu. Maybe, Keanu said. Thanks for checking in. He hung up the phone. He set the guitar back in its stand. He felt lighter. It felt good to make that choice. Anger was heavy. Forgiveness was light. He walked back to the window. The rain was starting to slow down. The city lights below were clearer now. He thought about the guard downstairs. Right now, the kid was probably sitting in that chair, staring at the door, heart pounding, waiting for the axe to fall. He was probably thinking his life was over, but it wasn't over. Tomorrow, he would go back to work. He would see Keanu in the lobby or in the elevator, and he would recognize him. And the next time a guy on a motorcycle walks in, maybe, just maybe, he would hesitate before judging him. Maybe he would be a little kinder, a little smarter. That was the win. Not getting someone fired, but changing the way they saw the world. Even if it was just a tiny bit, Keanu turned away from the window. He went into the kitchen and opened the fridge. He took out some leftovers and put them in the microwave. As the food spun around, lighting up the kitchen with a soft glow, he realized he was hungry. The anger was gone. The cold was gone. He was just a guy waiting for his dinner. The incident in the lobby would be a story people would tell. Remember the time security tried to block Keanu Reeves? It would be a funny anecdote. A celebrity mishap. But for Keanu, it was just another Tuesday. It was a reminder that no matter who you are just a person trying to get through the door. And sometimes you have to help the person guarding the door understand that. The microwave beeped. He took out his food, the smell of warm pasta filling the room. He sat down at the small table in the kitchen. He took a bite. It tasted good. It tasted real. He looked at the empty chair across from him. He imagined the guard sitting there. He wouldn't yell at him. He wouldn't brag about who he was. He would just say, "Hey, good job staying alert. Just look closer next time." And in that simple thought, in that quiet apartment high above the city, the truth finally settled in. The truth wasn't about a famous actor and a mistake. It was about how we treat each other when the lights aren't flashing and the cameras aren't rolling. Keanu Reeves lived his life in the spaces between the scenes. And in those spaces, kindness was the only security detail that mattered. He finished his dinner, put the plate in the sink, and went to bed. The city kept humming below him, indifferent and beautiful. Tomorrow, he would get on his bike again. And tomorrow, the doors would open.